Cool. And I will pass it over to Korina to get us started with conference season preparation.
Woo, woo. All right. It is what I like to call tis the season. And if you haven't already started, you probably will be starting soon if you're a development person to engage in conferences for the year. I recently started calling it the season because by show of emojis, who has watched Bridgerton? Anybody? I saw one person, two people, a few. If you haven't, you should. I liked it. It's on Netflix, I think. There's like 3 seasons now, but that's irrelevant. The thing is that if you've watched it, and it's not too much of a spoiler, but first season centers around, it's in, I think it's England, right? Anyway, they have the ball season, where all the debutantes you see in the bottom right corner there are presented to society, and they go to a series of balls to basically try to get chosen and get married. Now, that's not exactly what you're doing here, but what you are doing is putting yourself out there and going to these different conferences. So I like to think of every conference a different ball that you're preparing for, to really put yourself out there and highlight your organization and the work that you're doing and trying to get chosen for some money. Now, it's not a competition, and Bridgerton kind of is, but here we like to think of fundraising as coming from a place of abundance. So there's plenty for everyone, and we'll talk about how we work on collaboration in a minute. But it's an amazing time for you to make connections in one place. Like if you're going to one particular conference, you get to make connections or reinforce connections with some of your existing funders or potential funders and other national stakeholders too, right? There might be people that are working on similar work with you from out of state that you'll be meeting with, and even people from Arizona that you haven't seen that you so happen to be having lunch with one day. But for the purposes of this training or this community of practice, we'll be talking through the fundraising lens and what that looks like. Things to consider before we even get into the other pieces about, the best practices for the conferences. You want to keep in mind that you are not an operative. I know that putting yourself out there like a debutante can seem scary, but donors are real people. They're normal people. A lot of the folks you are connecting with are program managers and donor advisors. Not very often will you get the actual donor. So, these are folks that are in the business of redistributing wealth. That's the way that you should look at it. And as much as you're there to impress them and to show up and show your work, they are also wanting to build a relationship with you as much as you want to build a relationship with them, so that they can take it back to their donor. And that's something very important for you to remember. So don't be afraid to ask questions when you get into these meetings, and to really make a genuine connection, to be yourself. You want to show up as your best self, whatever that means for you. I always like to, dress up a little bit. Dressing up a little bit means something different for everyone. So whatever that means to you. I also like to have my little starter kit, which includes hydration packs. Make sure you're hydrating, and I use eye drops. You're likely going to be out at night, and if you're anything like me, I look like a zombie the next day. So I always make sure I order my Lumify eye drops. Plug, those are the best. Anyway, so those are some small tips, but before get into it, something for you to also consider is thinking about which are the right conferences for you. There's like a million conferences out there, right? And Mo has done the diligent work of putting a list together for you all. And we can go to the next slide. But these are a few of the conferences that are coming up that I thought, we could talk about and just highlight in this specific call because they are more donor centered, which means, you're likely to find donors or program officers in these spaces coming up. And so you really, as you're doing your planning for the year, if you haven't already done so, you take a look at this list. You want to choose the conferences that are going to be of benefit to you, right? What is your goal as you're going into these conferences? Is it to make new connections, reinforce connections, both? And learn new things, maybe, we're not forgetting that there's actual programming happening at these conferences. So thinking about what are the right conferences for me and making sure you register ahead of time. So that is the first step. We go to the next slide. We're going to be talking about some best practices. Once you've decided, okay, these are the conferences I'm going to go to. I got my outfits, I have my eye drops, let's go. And this is what we're doing. Co-collaborate and strategize. So you might not be the only person. You probably won't be the only person or the only team going to a conference. We have AV that's coming up. We have BISC that's coming up. And maybe you've heard of these conferences, maybe you haven't, but these are conferences that normally at least 2 to 3, if not more, in-state organizations go to. So how can we make the best of our time, and our efforts in a collaborative way? It doesn't mean you're going to go into all of your meetings together, but is there opportunity for us to do some meetings together? Is there opportunity for, me to make introductions to a specific funder or for another org to introduce you to someone you've been wanting to meet? Can we put an event together for this space? And what is the message that we're telling about Arizona? Because one thing about funders is they want to know about you, they want to know about your organization, but they also want to know how you and your work fit into the bigger picture of winning and of creating change. So we want to make sure we are all on the same page about the story that we're telling. And so co-collaborating and strategizing, another great example is panels. Do we have the opportunity to be on some panels together and talk about the state? Or if only one org is up there, like, can we help that organization tell the story of Arizona in the best way possible? And then the strategized part also goes to something that you should be doing on your own with your team, which is, a lot of what we're going to be talking today about is like meetings with the assumption that you're setting up meetings ahead of time, or, you're running into people to set up meetings. But if you're a new organization or a new director, and you don't have a bunch of connections and you really want to maximize the time that you're taking away from your family, from home, and you're spending money to go out to this event, is that you're going to have to work the hallway. And what that means is you're going to have to get out there during lunch, or maybe even when there's like, a session that you might not necessarily care for. And you're going to have to go up to people and say hi, introduce yourself, talk to them about what you do. Say, hey, you don't mind, like, come, let's go sit down and talk a little bit more. If they're busy, be like, hey, we should grab coffee before the conference is over, right? So that should be part of your strategy when you're at these conferences, is like, do I have enough meetings? If I don't have them, what is my strategy to get these meetings set up? So that's best practice number 1. We can go on to number 2. Logistics. So I talked about some logistics, just like some small things, but there's other logistics that you should be considering. You should always have a full itinerary of events that are, that you're thinking of partaking in. What we do is we do like our flights, departure, when we arrive, where we're staying. when the conference begins, and then we start plugging in meetings that we have so that we're not missing anything. If these are preset meetings, we're inviting the donor or the stakeholder with a calendar invite. So full itinerary and doing a check-in probably the morning of, and then a debrief at the end of the day. You should, to the extent that you can, be sending emails and text outreach ahead of the conference to donors. Again, if you're new, don't have that many connections, that's maybe something that you don't have access to, but then you need to be doing that work as it's coming and presenting itself to you at the conference. Take notes. So if you have a notebook, that's great. Some people, during a meeting don't want to pull out their computer, but maybe take notes in your notebook. That's a standard best practice, or on your phone, and then make sure to transfer that over, because you think you'll remember, but you won't always remember the data. And then most important is to make sure you track any next steps that are going to be needed. And of course, the logistic pieces, we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, but make sure you register. Okay, I am guilty of this. I'm like, am I gonna go? Am I gonna go? Yeah. And then it's like, conference is closed. Gotta call some people, and like, register ahead of time, get your tickets, get your hotel, get your eye drops, get it all, so that you're set and you're gonna have a good experience. All right, let's go to number 3. Funder research. So as much as you can do this ahead of time, the better. There's nothing's going to supplement you getting to know a program officer and the organization that they represent better than actually having a meeting with them. But the more you can find out, the better. So don't kill yourself trying to do this research. But if at least you can get, some, you also don't want to waste your time and be trying to meet with somebody that completely has no interest in your work. So knowing what funders care about is important. I know Mo and the folks at Instituto have created a lookbook where they have profiles of donors out there. And so using that as a resource and then adding additional donors that may be of interest to you, so you know what they care about, what their funding priorities are, how they funded in the state before. And do you have any mutual connections that could potentially introduce you? Like I said, if they're going to be at this event and you haven't been able to get a hold of them, or you don't have a contact there, can we get so-and-so to introduce us? So, do some research. Generally try to see what, people look like. I know people look different in real life than their pictures, but sometimes you might see them and you're like, oh, hey, that's so-and-so. Let me go flag them down. Next. And then best practice number 4, debrief and follow up. So, something to mention, the AV is a little different. AV's America Votes, that's coming, it's a big summit that's coming up next week. But a lot of these other spaces, national funding spaces, are no pitch zones. So you're not supposed to pitch. You can talk about your organization, but you don't ask for money. It's considered rude. Don't ask me what. But people generally rely on follow-up. They know that you're going to ask them for money at some point. But we usually treat these, even though, like AV, if you've never met a donor before, unless they explicitly ask you, you're probably not going to make an ask, because, it's might not, get you anything. What you want to do is have the meeting, find out all the things we talked about, let them know who you are, what you're about, and then set the expectation that you're going to be following up with them. So, and sending whatever thing they asked you or wanted to know more about. So once this, you could do this daily, or you could do it at the end of the conference with your team, or if it's just you, go through all your notes, look at all the next steps and follow up. That's going to be the most important piece, because it's not going to do you any good to spend your time and energy to go to these things and not do the follow up. And then I would track, did this actually, this is something we haven't done, should do, is what did I gain out of this conference in the long run, right? If you met a new donor and then you did a follow-up, and did you get some money out of it, right? And then next year it can be like, oh, this is what was the result. So these are some of the quick best practices. There's a final best practice that Mo is going to help us go through, and that is the conference season preparation checklist and template. So I talked a lot. Mo was able to put this all into one resource for you, and he's going to go through that quickly with you all.
Thank you, Korina. So this will be readily available to y'all in the follow-up email. But basically, this checklist, to show y'all how to utilize it, at the beginning, it kind of just gives a little description of what this is, how to utilize it, the benefits of it. And so if you ever want to send this out to some folks or your friends or family, whoever is going to a conference, you're more than welcome to do this. And something that I noticed about this checklist is that it doesn't just pertain to folks who are going to funder-based conferences. This can also be utilized at conferences just for comms folks, just for data folks, just for whatever field or program, right? You just switch the name funder to whatever it is, and you can still get the same benefits. So at first you're going to see some of the conferences that are outlined, and we'll continue to build off this list. So this is a live livable document. Then it goes into a pre-conference preparation, and it goes into your travel and accommodation, setting up goals and objectives that you'll revisit during your debrief to see how you did, where are areas of growth, where are places that y'all have succeeded in. And so followed up with some questions of, how many new connections do you aim to make? How many potential funders do you plan on introducing yourself to? How many sessions do you plan on attending, right? These are some of the questions that you can ask yourself when creating objectives and goals for the conference that you're going to. Then it starts to go into tiering your funders and this whole research funder portion, right? And so tiering your funders kind of just allows you to prioritize which funders you should meet with first versus the ones that you should meet with later on. And we also have a link to our lookbook here, which will also be available to y'all. And so this is just a lookbook. Y'all are more than welcome to utilize the folks in this lookbook if you want, if those are your targets, but this is just a sample of what it looks like. So we have David Martinez up on top. That's the name of the person in this picture, their title, the picture of the person. Nothing is worse than knowing who you want to talk to and not knowing how they look like. So don't make that mistake. Know who you're talking to, know how they look like. And then the foundation name under the picture, and it doesn't have to be formatted like this, but this is the way we do it. And so I start off a little bit about like their own personal journey, so you can find a lot of this information on LinkedIn, and then it goes in more depth on the foundation's mission and their priorities, the buckets of funding that they have. And so this is meant to be, when you're on conference season, it's go, 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 right? And this could be an easy document that you could pull up on your phone, see the person, see their name, their title, and bullet points of like what they do, who they are, and some of that information. So as we go down through this checklist, you'll see examples of email preparations, right? What to include in the email, follow-up email. So these are great things for you to include before going to conference season so you can continue to be successful. Centralize your notes, itinerary, and so for folks, and then we have like the during the conference portion and post-conference tools. And so for folks who are a little bit more seasoned and just kind of want to make sure that they cover all their bases, you can go down here to a pretty bare bones checklist where it's just simple logistics are taken care of, objectives and goals are taken care of. So you could just come all the way down here and kind of just make sure all your bases are taken care of. But this will be available